So if you've ever found yourself looking at something like this or this, the golden ratio, and wondering how on earth do I use this to balance or to improve my logo design, then this next tip is for you. This tip is all about balancing, and although there's a reason we're designing logos and not machines or AI, we want to optically balance things. This can give you a really good starting point, if not make the final decision for you. So what tools do we use to balance logos? Well, you may have seen this before. It's the golden ratio, and it really spirals down in size. The basic idea is that in this spiral, the two objects that are lower on the spiral equal the diameter of the next object going up in the spiral. So you can see these two circles, they perfectly match the diameter of this one, and then these two circles, they match the diameter of the next one, and so on, going up and up onto infinity. So how do you use that? How is that useful when it comes to logo design? Well, before I show you, let's just go on to another example of this golden spiral. And there's many courses showing you how to create this. In fact, I think on Skillshare, there's a class showing you how you can create these starting points. But once you have them, and this is another I've created earlier, you want to use them as a useful reference. So I'm going to create a shape just to capture, I want to make sure I get this spot on, the width. I'll use 3 segments. And that's a little rough, but it's just for the sake of showing you in this video. So I've colored these, and this is the way I like to use them when I'm looking to balance my work. You can copy and paste these objects, maybe save a document, call it balancing, and then you can always cut and paste these as a reference into your work. Now, how do we use these as a reference? Well, if I head along to the next artboard, you'll see a logo I created earlier, and the general idea is that aligning things, it could be spacing, it could be weight, to this golden ratio, it creates something that's more visually pleasing. So I'll show you how that might work with the relationship these elements have with each other. So it's sometimes known as the rule of thirds. It's not quite a third. If I take this smallest segment and I duplicate it 3 times in a row, let's do it like that so you can see it. You'll notice it doesn't quite equal that larger shape. So each segment is almost a third, but not quite. You could, if you want to just do this quickly, you could work with thirds, but we've taken the time to create this with a golden ratio, so let's use it. And you'll notice if I take these segments, and what I'm going to do is position them in such a way that the largest segment aligns with the height of the main logo type in the brand here, then what it would be interesting to see is if the spacing and the overall balance follows this golden ratio. And remember, it doesn't have to align precisely. We want it to feel right optically, but this gives us a really good starting point. So if a main logo type aligns to the height of this segment here, if I duplicate down the next segment, you'll notice that for this to look balanced, it's not far off of 2/3 or the next segment down in that golden ratio. And to our eyes, that just looks pleasing. It looks balanced. And then if we take the smallest segment and we place that alongside this word London, again, it's not precisely aligned, but it's roughly 1/3 or another segment down. If we look at the spacing between the main logo type and London, again, it almost aligns to this segment, this grid. So we could use this to fine-tune the balancing. I could align that so that the spacing for London is exactly one segment. And then if I really wanted, I could even transform the word London. I'll have to recenter this so that it's precisely one segment in height. I'm going to group these independently. There we are, and there we are. Just so I can center align that. And if we remove these guidelines, that looks really well balanced optically. So that's how, in practical terms, you actually use these golden ratio grids that you may have seen. And by creating those little colored segment guides, it's a really quick and easy way to drag it into different positions in your artwork. And as I say, I would trust your instincts and your eye, but to perhaps create the initial layout, the relationship in size, the spacing, it's a really good way to go. I'll show you another tip when it comes to balancing. And again, we're looking at the same brand here. And this is when it comes to kerning between your letters, particularly in logo type, which is an all-important part of a logo. So again, I'm using this color system. All of the shapes I've created that are this gray color, they have the exact same width. And I've just positioned them in the spacing between the letters so that you can see here, I've actually ignored the geometric spacing, and I've put this little colored marker where there's some optical compensation required. Now that's because if you look at the logo, although between the top of the T and the E, there's quite a small space, there's a massive gap at the bottom because the profile of the T opens right up, and we get the same here between the T and the R. We also, to a lesser extent, get it because of this curve at the top of the R and the O, and between the O and the L. So when you're thinking about kerning, and again, this is just a quick tip, I'm not teaching a class on kerning, but this is the way I kind of quickly drag these colored shapes in to help me with the optical balancing. It's just a quick, easy reference. Drag these into place and you're able to compare like for like. So in the spaces where I've noted that I need to compensate, I'm just ignoring by a little the geometric spacing, but in other places I'm honoring it. So another helpful guide, just a little trick you can use in Illustrator, using these color-coded objects to help you balance things. And you can see when we look at the end result, it feels really nice, really well balanced to the eye. So another example, here we've got a brand mark. I'll show you the end result for this brand, Highbridge. And just looking at the brand mark here, well, how could we use the rule of thirds or the golden ratio to kind of help us with the way this is balanced? Well, again, if we drag in those little useful guide shapes, and we're not looking for this to align perfectly, but I wonder what the relationships are. If we expand this so that it matches the scale, look at that. the lower part of a brand mark is exactly one segment above the upper part of a brand mark, which is what causes it to feel so well balanced. If we rotate this the other way, and we look perhaps at these segments, I'm just going to duplicate this. I'm going to just ignore that little tip of the serif because that's really not having a great impact on the overall profile of that shape. And then we drag this inside. You can see again, for it to feel well balanced, it's very closely following this golden ratio. So when you're creating something like this, it could be any kind of brand mark, shape, type, object. If you just drag in that helpful grid as a guide, sometimes it helps you to just nail the balance before you fine tune it optically. For me, looking at these spiral grids is quite scary. Trying to somehow drag this over your work and make sense of it, it tends to get me in a mess. But by using that tip, if you just color code just a few of these segments, so you've got the diameter there, you can drag and you can position that over your work, and it really is a useful, effective guide. And the same when you're looking at spacing. When I'm looking at compensating optically, it's really helpful to just color code things and make a visual note of the places I need to compensate. So I hope you find that tip as helpful and as time-saving as I have.